Hello and welcome to myfinanceteacher.org. In this video we're talking about US dollar and the precious metals. But first I want to start with your comments. Thanks a lot for commenting on the videos. I learn a lot from your comments and I do get some very interesting ideas from you guys. So here are a few comments that I want to look at. Firstly, one of you guys suggests to look at the US dollar, and I think it is a great idea. To be honest, I should have looked at US dollar in some of my videos, especially in relation to precious metals, more often. So let's do that now. Here's the daily chart price for the US dollar. And as you guys know, I like to look at cycles, mostly intermediate cycles, because they're relatively easier to identify. Those last for about half a year in the US dollar. And sometimes I also try to look at shorter term daily cycles, which last for anywhere around between 1 month and 2 months in the US dollar. So talking about the intermediate cycles, this is what I see on the US dollar. That's one intermediate cycle lasting between September 2018 and January this year. Another intermediate cycle lasting from January all the way until nearly the end of June. With a substantial rally in the US dollar since the 25th of June, we could say that 25th was definitely an end of the previous intermediate cycle, and we're now in an advancing phase of the next one. Now let's zoom in a little bit and look at the details of the current cycle and see if we can forecast anything based on our knowledge of cycles in general and US dollar cycles in particular. So over the last couple of days, we see big red candles on the US dollar. In addition, those red candles come at the time when the US dollar index broke through the upper range of the Bollinger Bands. If we look at the previous intermediate cycle, it consists of a lot of shorter term cycles, shorter term daily cycles, and often these daily cycles top once they break above the Bollinger Bands. So that's one indication of a possible very short-term top in the US dollar. Another indication is the duration of this daily cycle. So far it has been going on for around 38 days. As these cycles last anywhere between 1 and 2, maybe 2.5 months, it's already time for the cycle to enter into its declining phase. And lastly, what we see on RSI, it has just touched the overbought territory, and judging by the previous intermediate cycle, that also might indicate that it's time for the US dollar to cool down a little bit. However, remember, I'm talking about a daily short-term cycle that is possibly entering into its declining phase. So we might see a daily cycle bringing the US dollar down over the next couple of weeks, let's say possibly to that 50-day moving average, or possibly to the previous high of around 97.5. However, again, this is a short-term cycle. If we talk about the intermediate cycle, it has started relatively recently. The intermediate cycle has only been going on for about 6 weeks, that's a month and a half. Generally, these last for about half a year. So we're still very early in the intermediate cycle. So although over the next few days, maybe a couple of weeks, I see dollar retesting somewhere around 97.6, 97.5, in the intermediate term over the next several weeks, over the next few months, I see dollar rising substantially higher as we continue the advancing phase of the half a year cycle. Now, talking about the question, how high can the dollar go? Let's have a look at what happened in the past few intermediate cycles. After this declining phase in August through September, US dollar has actually extended further up to 272 Fibonacci extension numbers. Then again, after this declining phase in December through January, the US dollar again extended to 272 of the Fibonacci extension numbers. And in the current intermediate cycle, already after the previous decline, the dollar has nearly reached that 272 extension number. However, we are still very early in the advancing phase of this intermediate cycle. So there is still a good chance and there is still enough time within this advancing phase for the dollar to possibly reach to 414 Fibonacci extension. That's somewhere around 99.5. So over the very short term, I think US dollar should cool down a little bit over the next few days. But over the next several weeks to a couple of months, I think US dollar is going to strengthen a little bit. Now let's go back to those comments again. Another really interesting comment says that the gold rally hasn't even begun. This is actually an interesting comment. As I mentioned, I do learn a lot from your comments, guys, and thank you for that. I learned here that gold are created when supernovas, the stars, collapse. And the price of 10,000 US dollars per ounce would still be very cheap for gold. Well, maybe in the very, very long term, that is true. For example, looking at the previous very long-term cycle that lasted for about 7 years, we see that gold rallied from as low as $680 all the way up to just under $2,000, and then had to come down to around 1060. So in the advancing phase of that long-term cycle, the gold price has tripled. Since the price of 1060, we've only seen a gain of around 35% so far. So yes, from the very long-term perspective, this gold rally hasn't even started yet. In the very long term, I think we're going to see higher highs on gold price. But to me, it's also interesting to try to catch these advancing and declining phases of much shorter half-a-year cycles. So although I do agree with that comment of gold being very, very cheap right now in the very long-term perspective, it is also interesting whether it's time for gold to cool down a little bit in the shorter term over the next couple of months. And that brings us to the next comment. Gold above 1500 this month. Well, actually that might happen. It actually might happen, but I'm not really sure about that. So let's look at the details. So looking at gold price on a daily chart, the recent rally since May has finally broke above that resistance at about 1370, 1380, 1350, somewhere around that. And my first question, which I really wonder about, I'm not 100% sure of an answer to that question, is whether that short-term decline in gold price at the very end of June and the 1st of July can count as a retest of that breakout. Or are we going to have a proper retest again relatively soon? So one possibility I see is that we'll retest that breakout and then go for significantly higher highs, maybe just under 1500. We'll see about that. Or another possibility, just like we saw in early 2016, we first continue the rally, go up to 1500, and then see maybe a retest of that continuation or a retest of the breakout. I think both of these are quite possible, although I'm leaning a little bit more towards the side of a correction first before we go considerably higher. So what are the positive things for gold? Well, for now, gold is still within this channel that is trending up, and over the next several days, as the US dollar declines, we might actually see gold continue moving towards the top of this channel, giving us a higher high within this second daily cycle, lasting from the very beginning of July. After that, we might see a little bit of volatility, a little bit of cool down, and a continued grinding higher of gold price. Another positive development is the 50-day moving average, which has almost caught up with the gold price. Over here on the 1st of August, gold price was actually pretty close to that 50-day moving average at the bottom of that week. Another positive thing in the very short term is this RSI, which has reached nearly neutral levels of around 52. So there might be some fuel within this RSI to go back towards overbought levels and for gold price to go towards 1470, 1480 over the next maybe couple of weeks. And once this recent high at about 1453 is broken, we might see some panic buying by investors in gold, which might actually push gold towards that magical 1500. So that is my scenario for a positive development in terms of rising gold price towards 1500 relatively soon, maybe even this month, as the comment suggests. And the strongest factor in the support of this possibility might be the short-term decline of the US dollar over the next couple of weeks. However, in the intermediate term, over the next several weeks to 2 to 3 months, I think dollar is going to be stronger. That is why I'm not very convinced that we are going to see 1500 on gold price this month. So I would give this scenario, I don't know, let's say 30 to 40% chance. It is still pretty likely. So let's say 40% chance. But it's not my main scenario though. I'm a little bit cautious on gold at the moment. Now let's talk about the other scenario. In the other scenario, which is the primary one for me, I see gold continuing higher for the very short term, several days, maybe a week, as the US dollar declines into that short-term daily cycle low. However, after that, US dollar is expected to strengthen over the next few weeks. So that might be one of the forces that brings a retest of that breakout, maybe at around 1370, 1380, a retest of the 50-day moving average before we continue with this rally towards 1500. And that would be past August already. Another cautionary sign for me is the fact that higher prices on gold have not been confirmed by high RSI. We've talked about this a lot in previous videos. That is a negative divergence, and often it's indicative of coming decline in the price of the asset that you're looking at. And the last cautionary sign for me, which is actually the least significant at the moment, is the comparison between gold and silver. This last week in gold has been really good, whereas this last week in silver has not been that good. So silver as well as RSI are not confirming stronger gold prices. So for those reasons, I think although gold might continue higher over the short term and maybe even break slightly above this recent high, which was at 1453, maybe gold kisses that 1460 over the next few days, I do think that there is a good chance of a strong decline in the medium term, say over the next few weeks, especially as this second daily cycle matures and enters into the declining phase. So that is actually another important cautionary sign for me. The current daily cycle, the second one in the ongoing intermediate cycle, has been going on for 32 days. These cycles last generally for a couple of months, so it's not very mature yet, and it might not enter into the declining phase anytime soon. On the other hand, it's not very young either. It's already been going on for 32 days. So that is why this is a little bit of a cautionary sign for me. If gold continues higher over the next several weeks, that would extend that cycle up to, say, 40 days or so, and it will be time for some sort of a correction into the short-term cycle low. These corrections into short-term cycle lows don't really have to be severe, so we might not really go as much down as 1370, but some sort of a correction, I think, might be a good entry. And especially if we retest that breakout at 1370, I think that will be a much safer entry for the next jump towards 1500. So that's what I think on gold in both short term as well as intermediate term. I do try to provide as much value as I can for you guys in these videos. So in return, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, hit the bell notification as well so you don't miss any of these videos. Check me out on the website myfinancesteacher.org. In future, I will try to spend more time looking at gold and silver miners. There's been a great comment asking to look at Kirkland Lake. I'll have a look at that as soon as I can. So stay tuned and good luck in your trades.